All right, Ethan Skolnick here. Today's episode is brought to you, as the last one was, by the Seltzer Mayberg Law Firm. Make sure to give them a call at 1-855-5000-LAW or call onecalllegal.com. They handle cases from all over the states, slip and fall, accidents, traffic tickets, which they just took care of mine. Make sure you contact them. They have an attorney on call for you 24/7, 1-855-5000-LAW. All right, Ethan Skolnick back here with you. We're going to get back to the Dolphins. We did the Hurricanes in the last episode. These guys are fresh off a podcast. The latest 3 yards per carry podcast will be out at about midnight. Is that right, Alfredo? Midnight?
Yeah. Okay. Midnight tonight.
All right, so Alfredo Arteaga is on my left, and your right as you're facing the screen. Chris Kaufman, you know him as CK Parrott, is on the other side here. And the topic we're going to handle today is one that the two of them don't agree on, which I had a little trouble kind of finding that topic because I think on a lot of stuff you guys are in agreement. Maybe Simon, not all the time. Sometimes I feel like Simon doesn't agree with himself after coming up with an opinion, changes it a little bit. But today we're going to get into this idea of tanking, but specifically we're going to talk about whether or not the NFL is going to be moved by what the Dolphins are doing to either punish the Dolphins or punish other teams in the future for trying a similar tack. And when I asked Alfredo, I said, what is it that you and CK don't agree on? This is the topic that they came up with. So I'm going to start here with Alfredo. I'll go to you first. You think the entire premise is ludicrous, correct?
Yes, absolutely.
And why?
Okay, in 2000, Carmen Policy and Dwight Clark got fined $600,000, and the team had a third-round pick and a fifth-round pick taken away. Now, what did they do to have all these things happen to them? Well, they had an under-the-table deal with Steve Young that was undisclosed to fit in Brent Jones into the salary cap. They put in provisions into 3 rookies' contracts that were completely against the salary cap that allowed for the signing of a free agent linebacker called Lee Woodall.
Mm-hmm.
And essentially what they did was fudge about somewhere around $7 to $8 million on the salary cap. And what did that team do that year? I think they went to the playoffs. You could make an argument that without all those moves, they pretty much cheated the rest of the NFL. Now, what was the consequences? $600,000, a third-round pick, and a fifth-round pick. And that's considered the biggest, quote-unquote, cheating scandal as far as the salary cap is concerned.
Okay, but CK, you think in this case may be different.
Well, the Denver Broncos did the same thing just before then.
Oh, we're not getting his audio.
Audio?
Okay, I don't know that we're hearing CK right now. Hold on. All right, I'll go. Alfredo, are you?
Yes, we are. CK, keep going. CK, keep going.
Oh, so maybe I'm not.
Keep going, CK.
I'm not.
Let's just say this was experimental for the fans. Do you have me yet? No.
CK, I can hear you, so just keep going. All right? Keep going.
Okay, I'll just keep going then. The Denver Broncos got caught for the similar thing as what you were talking about earlier, but this is different. This is more of a case that's similar to when the Washington Redskins and Dallas Cowboys subverted the salary cap, which didn't exist, and so there was nothing to subvert. Back a couple of years ago, in between the CBA negotiations, and there was an uncapped year, and they chose to use that uncapped year to flush a couple of bad contracts so that they could have extra salary cap room in the following years, in the coming years. And the NFL fined them as well as docked them draft picks, even though they didn't break any rules. There were no rules that they had broken, no explicit rules. They didn't do anything illegal by the NFL's bylaws. What they did is violate more or less a gentleman's agreement about not using the uncapped year to inflate their budgets in years to come. And so I think that what the Dolphins are doing is essentially doing that. They're using a year where they plan to stink on purpose, and which really throws off the balance of competition in the entire conference as well as the NFL, and use that space from that year in order to furnish extra budgets for themselves in the future. And it wouldn't surprise me if at the end of the year, the Dolphins are so bad, and this is unprecedented. What we're seeing is unprecedented. If they're so bad that the NFL just has to look at it because everything is so loud and everybody is complaining so much about it.
Okay, Alfredo, anything you want to say about what CK just said?
Yeah, I don't think that they're going to be able to look at it, because this is going to be something about this. Essentially, what the Dolphins are doing is that they want to afford a Ferrari next year. So what they're doing this year is that they're not going to pay the rent, they're not going to pay their light bill, they're not going to pay their phone bill, they're not going to pay essentially nothing, and they're going to sleep under a bridge until the following year, so they can use all that money for the Ferrari, which is supposed to be the 2020 Miami Dolphins, which is what they're going to spend a lot of money in free agency to support, hopefully, the quarterback of our choice. That is, I think, something that has to go to the next CBA, and it's not something that they can arbitrarily, over the head of the NFLPA, just say, okay, we're just going to start instituting new salary floors and ceilings and caps and new provisions under contracts. This is something that has to be negotiated with the players. And I think what's going to happen is that whatever sins the Dolphins are committing today, just like the NBA player, just like the NBA owners conspired against the Big Three Heat to screw them over, they're going to conspire to screw over future tankers in the NFL. But that's going to be to the next CBA. I just don't see how they can justify changing rules before the new CBA is even negotiated.
Well, and I'll jump in here now that I
Well, I
can
think
here.
one thing you have to keep in mind is that Dominique Foxworth is already on board, or well, I guess against whatever is going on in Miami. We'll call it what it is. It's tanking.
Well, he says that we're bad people in his latest piece that he put on ESPN.
It was the ESPN headline writer that suggested that we were bad people, but and molest collies. But anyway, the Dominique Foxworth has expressed a lot of, I guess, I don't know, horrific, sentiments about what Miami are doing on behalf of the players and the NFLPA. And Dominique Foxworth was, of course, heavily involved with the NFLPA and still has contacts there. So I wouldn't be surprised if the NFLPA is fully on board with whatever the NFL Competition Committee decides to look at as far as options. And they don't have to. There's nothing in there that says you have to wait until the next CBA negotiation in order to actually do something and change the way the NFL operates in this manner. So I think that the idea that they have to wait for the CBA, I don't buy that at all. I think the competition committee is already looking at this. They've already commented on it, somewhat anonymously, but they have commented on it. They said they are going to look at it, and they have to, because if Miami is successful in this endeavor and they get to a Tonga Vailoa, Trevor Lawrence is coming out the year after, and everybody's looking at Trevor Lawrence. Who's next? And if you're getting this happening every year, I mean, this is embarrassing the Shield. The Dolphins have been outscored 133-16. They're on pace, as Ethan actually tweeted out, to be outscored 709-85 by the time the season is over, which is absolutely unprecedented, total embarrassment. It is like an FCS program facing an FBS program every week. And that just doesn't happen in the NFL. The NFL is built on parity. It's built on competition. It's built on any given Sunday. And this is and the NFL's 100th year. This is totally embarrassing. If it stinks that bad by the end of the year, all bets are up. Okay, as far as what their options are to handle this, they can create new rules going forward, and we can talk about some of those rules. But they can also look at Miami in particular and investigate and say, did you tank? Did you know that you were going to be bad on purpose? Was it for a draft pick? Why were you doing this? and let's see those internal communications. Let's see those emails. And it would be just like Miami to be sending around emails of tanks to each other and memes and stuff like that, just as part of this whole process.
Buying Tua shirts.
Yeah, I was going to say
They
they
can do
need to
whatever
buy
they
some
want.
Tua shirts. Well, let me ask you this, guys, because one of the premises here is that tanking hurts people, right? Like, in other words, there has to be an aggrieved party for them to make a decision, whether it's down the road or whether it's immediate. It has to be right now, right? You have to know. I mean, there has to be somebody who's hurt by it. So, who are we arguing, Alfredo, is hurt by this? Is it the fans that are hurt by this because they're paying for season tickets and then all of a sudden half of the roster's traded the week before the season or at least cut, and so then you don't have a situation where you're getting what you expected when you paid for it? Is it the players that are hurt by this because they know they can't compete? Because I could argue that if you're looking at the entire membership of the NFL Players Union, there are players who are getting opportunities in Miami, Alfredo, because opportunities have been created because of all the roster spots that have been vacated. So I guess there has to be an argument for an aggrieved party. Who is the aggrieved party?
Well, the fans are obviously getting screwed over here, okay? They're not getting a real product. This is not a real professional product, okay? They're going to lose, and they're going to lose a lot for the rest of the season. These are not going to be enjoyable Sunday afternoons for the fans. What Dominic Foxworth was trying to say was that this hurts actually the players, that they're going out there in a fruitless endeavor where they know they cannot win, and therefore, because they cannot win, they're at somehow a disadvantage where they can get hurt. Now, I've told this story already on 3 podcasts in a row. If that's the case, I had a player once tell me right to my face, these guys at the time, he tells me, these guys are 4-4. I'm 6-2. It's very, very common in the NFL to have players go out for themselves to get good tape, put good tape out there for the next contract, which could be next year, or it could be even with this team. So I don't see why it would preclude effort, because effort is really how people do get hurt in the NFL. Because if you're not going 100%, you're not trying hard enough, and you're just going through the motions, that's when ACLs happen. That's when a bad hit, a concussion, people can get hurt that way. So I don't see who really gets hurt besides the fans, who are obviously taking it on the chin this year.
Chris, who's the
I
aggrieved
think you have to
party?
keep in mind that in preseason there are unwritten rules and agreements that the coaches have with one another about how much the first stringers are going to play and when to put in the second stringers and the third stringers. And these coaches all cooperate with one another, because actually Nick Saban, when he was here, he used to talk about it more. But it is dangerous. It can be dangerous if you've got lower caliber players in there against higher caliber players, and there's a mismatch there. Yes, there is an increased risk of injury from guys pressing too hard. But in this case, I think what Dominic Foxworth is trying to say is that you're going to have players that are put in bad positions because of the teammates that are around them. We've seen it already. This is why Minkah Fitzpatrick stepped up and said, "No, I'm not doing this," and he asked out of town, and they were forced to grant his wish. It was because he was being used to bail out the lack of players around them. And he felt like he was being put not only in dangerous positions, maybe as Dominic Foxworth has implied, but just positions to look bad and to put together a lot of bad tape, and which would affect him come contract time. And he just wasn't on board with participating in that. And that's what Miami are doing. That's what Miami just did to Xavier Howard this weekend. They gave him the hardest of the hard duties. They had him travel around and follow Amari Cooper into the slot. He had a 3-way go everywhere. He had lots and lots of space. There was no pass rush, and no safety help. And they said, "Good luck, go do that." And Amari Cooper absolutely torched him. And he had probably the worst game. Xavier Howard had probably the worst game he's had in his career. And thank God he's already been paid that contract extension. But imagine the players that haven't been. And that's what I think Dominic Foxworth's point is, why it's unfair to the players. And yes, they do get paid. I mean, college players don't get paid, and these guys do. So they can only complain so much. But I think, again, I have to go back to it. The NFL at the end of this thing is going to look at the noise out there. And if the Dolphins are being outscored 709 to 85 by the time the season is done, and that's the level of competition that the Dolphins are at for the entire season, then you're going to hear a lot of noise. And at some point, some of the other owners are going to join in with that noise, and Roger Goodell might be forced to pay attention. And if it gets that bad, all bets are off as far as what they're going to do to the Dolphins. But I know this: 90%, they're going to do something to try and prevent this happening again going forward.
Yeah, we've seen leagues, Alfredo. I mean, the NBA has stepped in, at times. I mean, you go to the Cleveland, I think the best example is the Cleveland Cavaliers, right? Where it's always the Cleveland Cavaliers. But when Ted Stepien was trading all those draft picks year after year after year, right? Dumped all his first round picks. And they
Or
put
even
in
the Sixers.
And the Sixers, well, right. They basically moved Hinkie out, right? They're 2 GMs removed. But with Stepien, I mean, he was trading all those first-round picks, and now there's the Stepien rule. You can't trade first-round picks in consecutive years. Otherwise, Pat Riley would never have made a first-round pick in Miami, right? He would have dumped all of them. So, I mean, eventually there is a breaking point. I guess the thing for Miami fans that comes into this is it feels to Miami fans like we are always targeted, right? Like other markets do these things, but it always ends up being us. Something can happen with the Hurricanes and happen with USC, and it's going to be worse for the Hurricanes than it is for USC. With the Heat, you mentioned it. The rules were basically changed to break up the big three. Dan Gilbert was behind that. And then ultimately, Gilbert ended up benefiting from it because it led to, the Heat having to get rid of players like Mike Miller and others and Joel Anthony, that pissing off LeBron and him ending up back in Cleveland. That wasn't the only reason, but that was one of the reasons. The Marlins, there was a lot of bitching and moaning about that team that was put together in 1997, right, and the breakup of that team. So I feel like Miami fans feel like they're unfairly targeted. Do you feel that will play into this at all? Are we just paranoid about what's going to happen to Miami teams because it's always happened before?
Well, it's going to look that way in the media, but I don't know if the NFL is actually going to sit down and say, those people in Miami, let's go screw them over. I think in the media, it's going to seem that way because all the producers, they're in the Northeast, and believe it or not, they're Jet fans and they're Patriot fans, and we've already seen it by two very influential people. Both happen to be Jet fans. That's Rich Eisen and Mike Greenberg. Both of them have morning shows, one on NFL Network, the other on ESPN. So these are pretty big audiences. One guy he started off his show 2 days in a row talking about the tanking Dolphins, and that something needed to be done this year. Rich Eisen went as far as to say that the Jets should throw a couple of games, which is interesting. He's complaining about tanking, but he wants the Jets to tank 2 games to the Dolphins to keep them from getting Tua Tagovailoa. So it's already started, and it's mostly biased Northeasterners that don't want to see the Dolphins succeed, but it's going to look that way in the media. I don't think that the owners are just going to sit around and try to conspire just because it's Miami. I don't think they care. I think they would like to see a vibrant, good Miami Dolphin team because this market essentially has been damn near dead to the NFL for about 15 to 20 years. So I think they would be interested in seeing us get Tua Tagovailoa and spending some money and having a good team next year. But the media, it's going to be a different story, but it's mostly going to be because some of these guys are just biased and, their producers are Jet fans and all their panelists are Patriot fans, and you watch ESPN and it's essentially the Patriot Network. So, it's going to seem that way, but it's not. It's not going to happen that way. It'll be a fair process. At least I hope.
The question that I see every now and then, and that people even here in this chat are, is what Miami is doing, or is it really that unprecedented? We've seen other teams. I mean, there are a lot of other teams right now that are 0-3. There are teams that have been 0-16. I say that what Miami is doing is very unprecedented right now. If you look at the history of the teams over the last decade with the salary cap and what they've done, I think that even entering before the period before the season started, where they traded away Laramie Tunsil and then turned over like 25% of the roster and got rid of Kenny Stills and Kiko Alonso and all those people. Even before that, they were in new territory as far as what they were doing cash payroll, from a cash payroll standpoint, from a contract standpoint. They were severely underspending. And I know people like to point out that, well, it's because they were in cap hell and they had all this dead money and stuff like that. Well, their dead cap wasn't really an impressive percentage of today's salary cap. It was doable. It was manageable, and some of that was really an exercise of choice to flush that much dead cap down the drain this season. And so they come in. They are top 3, I believe, in the NFL right now in salary cap space, and they have the lowest cash payroll by something. I mean, the next lowest has spent maybe $30 million more than the Dolphins, plus, and that goes for the contracts as well. So what they're doing is unprecedented. It is the worst that we've seen. The Browns didn't do it like this, and so I think that's what you have to pay attention to when it comes to the idea or the possibility that something could be targeted a little bit more toward Miami. And I know you might want to say, well, that's just conspiracy against Miami, but I don't think that's necessarily true. I think it's the fact that Miami waved the flag much more blatantly than others have in the past. And that's what you have to look at. Now, I don't believe Miami is ever going to be looking at having that number 1 overall pick taken away from them. However, they got some extra picks from, say, the Laramie Tunsil trade, and the Laramie Tunsil trade is one of the things that are clearly tipping them over the edge toward being historically bad, the worst that we've literally ever seen in the Super Bowl era. And who knows? Maybe they decide to take away one of those second round pick or future first round pick. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I know that if Miami is this bad through all 16 games, something will happen.
All right, let's go to the last question here for you guys, because I think this plays into it, which is the issue of Josh Rosen, because they traded a second-round pick to get Josh Rosen with the idea that he could be the quarterback of the future, but everything that they're doing now is to get their quarterback of the future. I know CK has had strong opinions about this. I'll go to Alfredo first, because I feel like your opinion has changed a little bit. You didn't like the trade at the time, and I know you're still not high on a lot of the things that Rosen has done when he's been in there, but I feel like now you feel like he's a cheap backup going forward, potentially. Looking at the Josh Rosen trade now, in retrospect, was it the right thing to do? And do you see value in him actually playing out this season?
Well, I didn't like the trade when it happened, and if you hook me up to a lie detector, I still don't like the trade because I'd rather have that second round pick back. And who knows, maybe they'll draft another quarterback besides whoever they take number 1 overall next year. And they'll have 2 rookie quarterbacks next year. And one of them is going to compete with Josh Rosen for the backup job. But going forward, the trade was made. So after the trade, what do I think of the trade going forward? I think he's a good developing backup quarterback. And it's his second year, but it's obvious when you watch him play that he's still a developing player. Can he get better? Of course he can. People do get better. Now, what's his ceiling? It's probably not too high, but is it high enough to be one of the better backup quarterbacks in the NFL? I think so. And he's cheap enough for the next 2 years where it's worth exploring if he can be that. And who knows, if he becomes something better than that, then maybe they can get back a pick for him in a year or 2 from somebody who's quarterback starved.
CK?
I think they're wasting that second round pick because they're already starting him, and they're starting him in bad conditions. They're starting him with a bad surrounding cast. They're starting him in sort of circumstances where he can't possibly succeed. And to some degree, the internal evaluations go out the window when you've got a guy putting together a 60 passer rating for the entire year on an 0-16 team that is scoring 6 points a game or something like that. You can't even afford to bring that guy into the next year to have a completely sham competition with Tua Tagovailoa. in training camp. And I do believe that they will want to have competition for Tua Tagovailoa or whoever they draft in the 2020 NFL draft. So at some point, you're looking at the conditions in Miami being so bad that you can't even justify him being that guy. And at the end of the year, and so I think that starting him this early, they caved into pressure, and they weren't patient enough to protect the value of the second round pick that they traded for him. They could have protected it by keeping him on the bench, trying to get him into the game in spots where he would be more liable to succeed, and maybe with the defense stepping off the gas a little bit late in the games. Then he could have put out some good tape, and you could have justified keeping him. You could have justified trading him and recouping some value for him. Right now, I think that they've blown it. You know, they traded a late second rounder because everybody said it was good value because he was just drafted in the top 10 last year, and I don't think they were thinking about it much harder than that. And because they're caving into pressure, they're just going to piss away all that value, and that's going to be the end of it.
All right, follow these guys at CK Parrott, at Uptown Report. Also, check out the latest episode of 3 Yards Per Carry. We're about an hour away from it right now as we finish up this thing live. We'll work out the technical issues for next time. CK and I will talk on the chat since we had a little trouble hearing each other early here in the presentation. Obviously, check out also Simon Clancy had a long sit-down with Tua, and there was an excerpt played on the podcast, but there's going to be more coming in the coming days. He did that for Gridiron Magazine, which he works for across the pond. So thanks for joining us, and definitely check out Seltzer Mayberg. You can follow him at Seltzer Mayberg on Twitter, and again, it's 1-855-5000-LAW.